And I'm pleased to say that we're actually back on track in terms of our schedule for this afternoon. We are now going to move to the next speaker, who is Irina Antonijevic. She is the Chief Medical Officer of EveryONE Medicines, and Irina will talk to us about the mission and vision of EveryONE Medicines. So, Irina, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
I can see you
Can
there.
you hear me?
Okay,
Yes,
great.
perfect.
Yes.
Great. Let me see if I can share my screen. So, EveryONE Medicines was really founded by Tim, who just presented, and Julia. And we really critically sort of like rely in our foundation, even in some of the work that has preceded EveryONE Medicines. So it's something that we are really very humble about. And we are really grateful to be part of this community, which is this N of one community. And I have worked in rare diseases for a long time, but it is a very special community because it is really this very, very, very individual patient, individual child that really needs us as a community to come together and find a way to develop therapeutics. So in a nutshell, EveryONE Medicine's vision is that one day, and I don't know if I will be alive that day, but I hope I will, individualized precision therapeutics will be available for everyone because the genomic sequencing shows us a lot more insights into what might be driving diseases than we have anticipated before. But sort of to make it initially maybe a smaller mountain, as Winston just said, is that we want to focus on these individualized precision therapeutics that target N1 plus genetic variants that cause severe CNS disorders, and particularly in young children. And we think that, as Tim has also shown, starting with some of those individuals that have a very severe disease, this is where, even if we don't know everything we want to know about a new drug, we think it is justified to start treating an individual because of the severity of the disease. But we do also want to highlight the N1 plus. First of all, we think that if it's one individual or 3 or 5, it is still way too few to even consider a clinical trial. So it is really the same problem. The other reason why I feel very strongly about talking about N1 plus is that as we have had some first discussions about certain genomic data sets, it looks like some of the variants that we thought are maybe very unique actually do affect more than one individual. And so we really think, and Annemieke has recently, published this paper where she even talks about 50 is really still the same because it's way too few to conduct a clinical trial. And if we say N of 50, it just means that at some point in time, there might be a total of 50 patients, but they're not all amenable to an intervention at the same time. So with this vision and mission, I do really want to acknowledge our core founders. And I mentioned Julia and Tim because they are very well known, but I do want to mention also Keith Flanagan, who used to be at the FDA. He's a lawyer and he is now a part of the EveryONE Medicines core team. And, I don't want to dwell on Mila's story because Tim has explained this just a few minutes ago, but it is very inspirational. And really, Tim and Mila and Julia have really put in motion, I think, something that maybe before that nobody thought was possible, namely to develop an individualized therapeutic and specifically an antisense oligonucleotide. And I believe that the FDA has, based on the discussions with Tim, issued these draft guidances. And it is really the only country in the world that I'm aware of that actually even has a draft guidance on how to develop N of 1 therapeutics. So this is good. But I also think, to what Winston just said, we as a community, we need to do more, because we want to make this a much more systematic approach. That it's actually N of 1 for each individual, but it is a broader platform, and we can jointly learn and iterate the platform. And over time, hopefully, really thereby also treating a broader group of individuals. And EveryONE Medicines, I want to be very clear, has seed funding from renowned investors. And the goal here is to really make this a viable business. I don't want to say what kind of business, but a business that is sustainable, that does not require investor money to sustain itself, but it can actually generate a revenue stream, which would be based on reimbursement of these drugs. And I think that it's important, for me at least, to think about this as something that is simply part of healthcare. If you have a unique mutation and we have the technology to develop a drug, this has to be reimbursed like so many other therapies that are reimbursed. And EveryONE Medicines has started to reach out to payer representatives to discuss this. And we do want to be a truly global business. So we have reached out to US payer representatives, but also to European, and will be reaching out to payer representatives in the UK, because we acknowledge that in Europe, the healthcare systems are different and differently positioned to also take care of severe healthcare needs for individual patients. And currently, Keith is leading some of this coordination of getting this feedback. So the current EveryONE Medicines core team is located in Boston. So you see us here. So Nathan Birmingham is one of the investor representatives, and he is also the acting CEO. We have Barbara, who is our office manager and key coordinator. You have myself, and you have Deb, who is really a key part of this core team, running all the logistics. You here at IXL, you know Deb much better than you know me, because she has been in a lot of contact with you about the proposal that we sent to you, and then the feedback that we got from you, and having several discussions with you. So, so Deb is a very important contributor to everything we do. And then, of course, Keith that I mentioned, whom I actually consider part of the core team at EveryONE Medicines. But no matter what, we are very, very small. So we are very eager for an outreach to build a global network of partners, particularly, but also academic centers and consultants to help us accomplish both the mission and the vision. So many of you have probably seen that. It is the economic burden of rare diseases in the US alone. This has been put together by the EveryLife Foundation. And what I think is really important is, I mean, this is obviously for the entire US, but this is true in other countries to a similar extent. But you really have direct medical costs, but you have a huge other bucket of costs, these indirect costs, including productivity loss. And this, in a family where a child is sick, doesn't only affect, of course, the child wouldn't be working, but it does affect the parents and also the other children. So it is really a very significant burden on the entire family. And so we think that it is important to keep this in mind when we ask for health equity, which means that there should be reimbursement of a therapeutic that can help a child to not die and to live a better life. And I think Winston said this at the end also, is like we have to make sure that we have a way of measuring whether there is a benefit. We don't want to treat, even if it's a tailored therapeutic, if we don't think we have the benefit. So we want to make sure that we do include in the drug development process some way of testing, at least in a cell, whether the drug has the effect we want, but we ultimately also need to measure this in the individual patient in order to justify continued treatment. And these are just some of the numbers when we talk about rare diseases. And obviously, this is a perfect timing. And thank you, IXL, for giving us the opportunity to also join you here. It is the last day of February. So February is Rare Disease Month. So we think it's important to stress that while each rare disease might be rare, the number of people living with a rare disease is actually very large. And many of those individuals are children, and many of them have really a very severe and ultimately rapidly fatal disease. And many of those individuals have CNS manifestations. And so we think that ASOs, antisense oligonucleotides, are a great drug modality to treat CNS diseases, because we know that they can reach the CNS when they're injected into the cerebrospinal fluid via a lumbar puncture. So as you can see here, most of these rare diseases do not have an approved therapy, even though many individuals are treated. And you also see that many of them have a genetic origin, which again means that we can actually look at how we can affect that specific genetic variant. But I also need to caution and clearly state that not all genetic variants that cause the disease can be targeted with an ASO. But Winston, who also comes from maybe gene editing, RNA editing. I mean, we also think that in the future there will be different modalities to treat more of those genetic variants. But for now, as I said, EveryONE Medicine is focusing on antisense oligonucleotides disorders, and we want to be part of the community and become a trusted partner for investigators and families, and build this efficient platform that is iterative and rigorous in its sort of testing to deliver those therapeutics to patients in need. And we do say nucleic acid therapeutics, but we do initially start with antisense oligonucleotides because this modality is better understood and reaches the CNS without the need to put any other delivery vehicle on the ASO. And Winston also just mentioned Fyodor, and we think this is very important to keep in mind that we have actually the tools, the technologies to develop these tailored therapeutics. But there are legal, financial, and organizational obstacles or hurdles that we need to overcome. And we at EveryONE Medicines want to sort of build a platform to help address and overcome some of those existing obstacles. And we think that, again, as a community, by doing this and by doing more and more of this, it will be clear that this cannot be done on an one-by-one basis. This has to become much more of a platform, also for the sake of speed, so that we have a diagnosis and we can much more quickly develop an ASO, which ultimately means that we have to be better at learning what looks like a safe ASO, so that we don't need to do all the testing that we, even with the draft FDA guidances, still need to do today. And so the way we envision EveryONE Medicine's initial work is that we have a pilot program where we have a few individuals that have an causative. So we need to make sure that we all agree that the mutation that is identified is really causative, so that there is a real high chance that if this mutation is addressed, that there will be a significant clinical improvement of the individual. I said before that we are targeting childhood onset disease. We also think it's important to try to intervene as early as possible, so that there's a real chance for a substantial benefit. And as I said before, we want to make sure that we can, based on some of the work we are doing in the lab, then meaningfully or expect a meaningful clinical benefit with intrathecal injections. Both Deb and myself, as well as Ness and Barbara, have a lot of experience with antisense oligonucleotides. We have worked with them for several years. We actually all worked together in a prior company with antisense oligonucleotides for CNS disorders. So we do want to make sure that we select, based on very rigorous screening, the best possible ASO that then ultimately initially goes into the in vivo animal work and then ultimately to the patient. And we think there are certain standards of, it's not a guarantee, but it's important to select ASOs that have a high potency, that have no concern of target, so don't bind to something else that would be a concern, particularly in the target tissue, and have no relevant immune response. None of this is a guarantor that it will not have any effects, any side effects in the individual, but we think we can minimize the risk. And as Tim also said, some of those more class effects of ASOs can be monitored. And we think, again, it's very important that it's the rigorous preclinical screening, but then it is also the rigorous clinical assessment for both safety and ultimately also efficacy as we use those to treat individuals. And I think this sort of goes into what Winston also said is we want to learn, we want to use every single ASO development and every single clinical experience to feed back into both the screening and the selection criteria, and sort of to drive this knowledge gain to ultimately in the future have a smaller data package that is needed before we take it into a human, but also having the data to support that this is likely a safe as well as efficacious ASO. We also want to build a network with centers of excellence and other investigators who can actually administer the treatment. We also want to develop a toolbox so that individuals can reach out to EveryONE medicines and, for instance, ask for like just a standard ASO design that we could share. We talked about the mutual data sharing and the growing database that drives knowledge gain. And again, I think that with this increasing use of genome sequencing, we will identify more and more of these very rare mutations and potentially even develop antisense oligonucleotides proactively so that we are really ready to give a treatment, particularly as Tim also mentioned, when a very, very young individual has severe, for instance, epilepsy, so we could intervene as early as the diagnosis is made. So this is my last slide. We don't have yet any data, but we are starting to generate some data. And again, I would like to thank IXL not only for inviting us, but actually for hosting this entire day and bringing together this community. Thank you.